Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the closing session of this Human Dimension Implementation meeting. I'm the director of OTIR and I will be moderating this session. As usual, you know, there is, we have in the closing session, we have always the same topics on the agenda. We have, first of all, the closing statements of delegations of the participating states, followed by rights of reply for those who want to make use of that right. Then it will be followed by any other business, if there is something. And then there will be closing remarks by the Office of the OSCE Secretary General or his representative, OSCE Chairmanship, and then my closing remarks. I just want to remind you all that at this closing plenary, only the participating states have the right to speak and can sign up for the speakers list. Representatives for the speakers list are at the back of the head table here, where participants can sign up if they would like to take the floor. Participating states can exercise the right of reply in this session, as in all other sessions, after the statements, but they should signalize their intention to do so to the person here behind me. But I think without further ado, we can go to the statements of delegations, and I will give approximately 4 minutes to the statements. I have here as the first speaker on the list is the delegation of Serbia, followed by the United States of America. Serbia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Director. Distinguished Madam and dear colleagues, on behalf of the delegation of the Republic of Serbia, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the authorities of the Republic of Poland and to you personally, Madam Director Gisladotti, and your team for excellent organization for this year Human Dimension Implementation meeting. The HDIM as the most important event in human dimension field give us the opportunity to discuss the pressing and human rights and democracy issues and exchange the views with the representative of the civil society. During the past 2 weeks, we have heard a lot of useful and important views and recommendations and witnessed very interesting debates reminding us the values of human rights and democracy, and even more of our duty to protect and to promote them. The Republic of Serbia has always considered HDIM as to be an excellent panel to present our good practices in the field of human rights and to hear views and experiences of other participants that could help us in improving our differences. The experiences that we gain during this important event will be of high importance for the relevant institutions of our country that have been here with us for the past 2 weeks, as well as for those who participated in the participation of our delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to thank the Slovak chairmanship for keeping human dimension topics high on OSCE agenda and their tireless efforts in the process of organization of this year's event. Furthermore, allow me to use this opportunity to express our expectation that the forthcoming Albanian chairmanship will carry on with this practice and keep this HDIM agenda high on its agenda during its forthcoming chairmanship of the OSCE organization. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the United States of America, followed by Finland on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Director. In the interest of time, I'll deliver a shorter version of my statement here and submit a longer version afterwards. The past 2 weeks have demonstrated the breadth and seriousness of the human rights challenges that we face across the OSCE region. These HDIM discussions, including with non-governmental organizations, will help inform the United States' preparation for the Bratislava Ministerial. We will focus in particular on practical ways to improve implementation of OSCE commitments. No participating state bears more responsibility for the mistrust, insecurity, and human rights violations and abuses in this region than the Russian Federation, whose destabilizing actions constitute breaches of all 10 Helsinki Final Act principles. We and many others have outlined the consequences of Russia's occupation of Crimea and the mounting human costs of its continued aggression in eastern Ukraine. Even after the recent detainee exchange, Russia holds dozens of Ukrainian political prisoners. Russia continues its occupation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, both parts of Georgia, and its military deployment in Transnistria without the consent of the Moldovan government. The Kremlin conducts malign influence operations abroad while it abuses its citizens at home. Many speakers highlighted the Russian government's reprisals against human rights defenders, independent journalists, political opposition, members of ethnic and religious minorities, and those who do not conform to the so-called, quote, traditional values, end quote. Violence against the Kremlin's perceived opponents is met with impunity. As the Moscow mechanism found, abuses in Chechnya are serious and systemic. The Kremlin either cannot or will not stop them. By detaining thousands who protested the exclusion of candidates from the Moscow municipal elections, Russia failed to meet its OSCE election commitments and to respect the will of its own citizens. Russia continues to imprison over 280 political prisoners. As we and many others noted in our statements, there are serious human rights problems in other participating states as well. Actions by Turkey have undermined the rule of law, resulting in unfounded convictions against U.S. citizens, U.S. locally employed staff, and tens of thousands of others. Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan severely restrict civil society and media freedom, use anti-extremism laws to target dissenters and peaceful protesters, and hold political prisoners. We look to Uzbekistan to move forward with its reforms and release the remainder of its political prisoners. In insisting that states respect human rights, we do not seek to impose U.S. or Western values. We are calling upon them to meet their own international obligations and OSCE commitments, which they entered into freely and which often find reflection in their constitutions. All of us have decried the rise in hate crimes across our region. Everyone is born equal in rights and dignity, regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or identity. We reject anti-Semitism and all other forms of hatred. To combat hate effectively, we must take a comprehensive approach, working in partnership with the private sector, faith communities, civil society, and OSCE experts. The United States defends the independence and mandates of ODIHR and other institutions. HDIM provides a platform for rigorous, open debate. ODIHR's code of conduct should be stripped of content-based restrictions. One does not have to agree with what a government or NGO says in order to defend the right to say it. The United States opposes attempts by governments to unduly restrict civil society participation in OSCE proceedings. Prior to HDIM, there were attempts to prevent certain NGOs from attending. During the sessions, we saw the misuse of points of order to interrupt NGO speakers. We also saw counterproductive attempts to flood these proceedings with government-organized NGOs to crowd out authentic voices. Governments that employ these gongos discredit themselves and the narratives they seek to advance. The United States applauds the civil society activists who have come here to share your insights and recommendations. You have deeply enriched our discussions. Finally, Madam Director, taking reprisals against civil society activists for participation in HDIM is unacceptable. I thank you, Madam Director, for you and your team for organizing this meeting, and the people and the government of Poland for hosting us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Finland on behalf of the European Union, followed by Poland.
Thank you. I pass the floor over to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you very much. The full text would be made available later. I ask in any case for your leniency in terms of time, as I do speak on behalf of 28 participating states. Madam Chair, the European Union thanks the Slovak chairmanship and the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for their thorough work in preparing and organizing the Human Dimension Implementation meeting. It is a unique platform for engaging with civil society and for listening to independent voices, exchanging information and good practices, but moreover, an opportunity for all of us to be held to account in relation to our OSCE commitments. We regret that Turkey again chose not to attend the meeting, missing a valuable opportunity to engage in dialogue with other participating states and civil society, particularly given the negative trends with regard to the rule of law, independence of judiciary, human rights and fundamental freedoms in the country. There is an urgent need to reverse these trends. At the same time, despite concerns raised in Vienna regarding the participation in the meeting of some representatives from the civil society, we positively note the delegations of Tajikistan and Turkmenistan and HDM, and we encourage them to continue the dialogue with civil society. Many speakers have deplored the crackdown in human rights and fundamental freedoms, the attacks and increasing pressure faced by human rights defenders, including women human rights defenders, the intimidation and violence against journalists and other media actors, as well as increasing intolerance and discrimination in many parts of the OSCE region. We heard tragic stories of human rights abuses and violations of international obligations and OSCE commitments. We trust that no civil society representatives or family members face intimidation and reprisal for exercising their rights by taking part in HDM. Unfortunately, we also witnessed many attempts by some participating states to whitewash the situation in their respective countries by employing organizations to discredit independent voices and distract attention from real issues and challenges, or to promote their government's policies, measures, and views. This negatively impacts the dialogue among the participants and undermines the very purpose of this meeting. We remain deeply concerned about the dire situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, since its illegal annexation by Russia, which we condemned and will not recognize. We regret the many attempts by more and more speakers to whitewash the human rights situation in Crimea. We tell them once more, you have not succeeded. We thank the many brave civil society activists who continue to share information about human rights violations on the peninsula. We reiterate our call for full and unimpeded access for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, OSCE institution, as well as to all international human rights monitoring missions and human rights NGOs to the Crimean Peninsula. The human rights and humanitarian crisis continues to mount also in areas held by Russia-backed armed formations in eastern Ukraine. We remain firm in our call on all sides to swiftly and fully implement the Minsk agreements in order to achieve a sustainable political solution in line with OSCE principles and commitments. The full access of all human rights organizations to the non-government control areas and the speedy delivery of humanitarian assistance are needed. We underline Russia's responsibility in this regard and yet again call on Russia to exert influence over the armed formations it backs to meet those commitments in full. While noting the recent exchange of prisoners between Ukraine and Russia, we also repeat our call on Russia to free all Ukrainian citizens still illegally detained, put on trial, or convicted in Russia or the Crimean Peninsula. The human rights situation in Russia continues to fall below its OSCE commitments and international human rights obligations. We've raised our concerns about the ongoing crackdown on civil society in Russia, the curtailing of rights and freedoms, and the shrinking space for independent media, including through misuse of reinforced anti-extremism and anti-terrorism legislation, as well as the use of information for destabilizing purposes. The latest disproportionate use of measures against opposition and civil society before and after the local elections questions the respect for fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Russian Constitution, OSCE commitments, and other international obligations. We remain concerned about the systematic persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, including the latest sentencing by the District Court of the city of Saratov of 6 Jehovah's Witnesses to many years of imprisonment. We also continue to follow the case of historian and memorial representative Yuri Dmitriev in Karelia and call for his immediate release. We denounce the human rights violations and abuses in Chechnya against LGBTI persons, human rights defenders, lawyers, independent media, and civil society organizations. And we call for thorough investigations and to bring those responsible to justice. We furthermore call upon the Russian authorities to make full use of the report under the Moscow mechanism and to implement all recommendations contained therein. We use this opportunity to reiterate our call to Azerbaijan to release journalist Afgan Mukhtarli. We will continue to follow closely the situation with
Can I
regard to human
please
rights,
ask you to
democracy,
conclude?
and the rule of
Thank
law
you.
in Azerbaijan, as well as in all the Central Asian countries, which is in many cases deeply worrying. We remain concerned by the continued enforced disappearance of many people in Turkmenistan's prisons, and we reiterate our call on authorities to immediately and effectively acknowledge this problem, take action, and eradicate this scourge. We take issue again with intolerant statements that were made during the meeting. They have no place in this meeting or nowhere else in our society. OSCE commitments are more relevant than ever,
Please,
and
the
we call on
time
all
is
participating
out.
states
If you
to
could
live up to them
conclude.
and reverse existing violations. I'm almost done. All participating states must respect the mandates of ODIHR, HCNM, and RFOM as essential instruments in their efforts to fulfill the OSCE commitments. We reiterate our constant support for the work and the mandates of the three autonomous institutions. We must also ensure that the OSCE institutions are adequately resourced to play their indispensable role. Finally, the European Union wishes to thank Poland for its hospitality and all those who contributed to the effective conduct of the meeting, including the moderators, keynote speakers, rapporteur, note-takers, and interpreters. North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania align to the statement of the European Union. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I have Poland, followed by Germany.
Good morning. Madam Director, Poland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. Additionally, I would like to share with you some remarks from the perspective of the host country for ODIHR. First, we would like to commend the work and commitment of ODIHR's team and your Director Gisladotri personally for successful conduction of the conference. This yearly meeting is the biggest European conference on human rights issues, in Poland, with its capital Warsaw being a center of dialogue on democracy and human rights, as the ODIHR and the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies have their headquarters here, is honored to host this unique event. We appreciate the fact that HDIM remains a platform of vivid exchange of recommendations and reflections among delegations of the participating states and numerous non-governmental participants. We are also glad to know that HDIM continues to be a conference of major interest of civil society. This has been a characteristic of HDIM since its beginnings, and we hope that will not change in the future. Madam Director, Poland has been and will remain a committed advocate for human rights and democratic transition worldwide. With this in mind, we would like to seize this opportunity to thank to all OSCE states who attended the meeting of directors on human rights issues co-organized by the Polish MFA and the Slovak chairmanship with participation of ODIHR and Council of Europe representatives. It took place on the first day of the HDIM and gathered participants from circa 40 participating states. During the meeting, we discussed how to strengthen the cooperation among international organizations in regard to youth participation in public life. We also exchanged views on the possibilities and challenges to cooperation in the human dimension. We would like to thank all delegations of participating states for their valuable contributions presented during the event, and we hope that they can be used in preparation of human dimension meetings and seminars in future. Last but not least, we would like also to express our gratitude to the Slovak chairmanship for their efforts to keep the human dimension highly on the OSCE agenda. We look forward to a fruitful cooperation with the upcoming Albanian chairmanship in 2020, and we ensure our Albanian colleagues about our full support in this regard. Thank you to all participants, and we look forward to hosting you all next year in Warsaw. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Germany, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Director. Germany, of course, aligns itself with the EU statement. Sehr geehrte Botschafterinnen und Botschafter,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking ODIHR and the Slovak Chairmanship in Office for the organization of this excellent conference. We also thank the Polish government, which is once again our host for this year's HDIM. Every year, this meeting shows that fundamental rights, human rights, democracy are not something that we can take for granted. We have to work hard to guarantee them. The importance of human rights needs to be underscored constantly, and that results in security and trust in the authorities when they are guaranteed. Otherwise, instability can occur. And we thank HDIM for the very large participation of civil society. Germany is very pleased to be able to cooperate with civil society, and we hope that in future meetings civil society will continue to be able to participate in our meetings because they do shed light on various gaps in our efforts. In Germany and in many other countries, we are confronted with new forms of anti-Semitism. The combating of anti-Semitism in all its forms is a very high priority for Germany, and we appreciate Odie's work in this regard. Germany has participated in the project called Turning Words into Action, and we are, of course, prepared to continue our cooperation with the office. As for the other points mentioned at HSIM this year, I would underline the following. The German government has committed itself to working hard to prevent discrimination of Roma and Sinti at the national and international levels. In 2019, in the spring, an independent commission was constituted in Berlin with a view to working on this problem of anti-Gypsyism. Insofar as hate speech is concerned, well, that is another top priority. We are involved in an enhancing stakeholder awareness to combat hate speech project of the ODIHR, and we are a member of the group of Friends for the Safety of Journalists, and we do implement targeted projects to ensure safety of media representatives. And we are involved in all of the areas, in fact, where human rights can be protected through the United Nations as well and its Human Rights Committee. And when we have the presidency of the European Union next year, we will turn this into one of the main themes for the Council of Ministers. I would like to stress also that Germany will continue to support the work of various OSCE organizations. They're all very important for us. Thank you.
And now I give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Armenia.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Switzerland would like to thank you personally, Madam Director, and also your entire team, as well as the OSCE chairmanship, for a job well done organizing this HDIM, which was done very swiftly. Our deliberations last week once again proved that this is a platform which is absolutely vital for cooperation between civil society and governmental authorities. We want to thank civil society for their contribution, which is of utmost importance. What's most important, however, is not just to speak, it is also to listen to each other. All of the recommendations, the advice which was given over the course of our deliberations is important, and over the coming weeks and months we will be focusing on the implementation of these recommendations. Madam Director, turning now to the theme of this year, we believe that journalist safety is very important. The 2018 Ministerial Council decision kickstarted the process, but it's only the beginning. We now need to put into practice these recommendations. Men and women journalists are being threatened in OSCE participating states. This is unacceptable. It is incumbent upon us participating states to ensure that they are kept safe. Switzerland took part in our very enriched debates, which took place over the course of all of these sessions. For instance, we discussed torture prevention, capital punishment, terrorism, and so on and so forth. The Swiss delegation invites all delegations to roll up their sleeves and to work hard to prevent and put an end to torture in the OSCE area. We hope that our deliberations here in Warsaw will pave the way for further work to be done in Bratislava. Madam Director, we've cast our gaze over all of the OSCE's activities, and in fact, you took us through all of the challenges which we're confronting. We must work tirelessly in order to ensure that we protect and promote human rights both to the east of Vienna and to the west. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Armenia, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Director. Let me express our deep gratitude to the Government of Poland, OSCE Slovak Chairmanship, and ODIHR for the organization of Human Dimension Implementation meeting. It is regrettable that despite the OSCE Slovak Chairmanship's strong commitment to a human-centric approach, human rights and fundamental freedoms of people living in conflict areas was not examined in the HDIM as a specifically selected topic due to the objection of handful OSCE participating states. In our view, it would have been an excellent opportunity to have substantial discussions on the human rights of people residing in conflict areas, thus preventing the attempts to misuse and abuse almost all agenda items to cover up poor human rights records by invoking conflict-related issues. The delegation of Armenia is concerned with continued attempts of some participating states to limit space of the civil society, not only within their respective countries, but in the HDIM as well. This year's HDIM meeting was marked by increased activity of state-funded NGOs who tried to promote official propaganda and political agenda of their governments and divert attention from the dire human rights situations in their respective countries. Such performance is a clear abuse of the HDIM, which undermines and discredits the value of dialogue and transforms HDIM to a comfortable platform for some states to spread state-funded propaganda. We understand that complete failure to comply with the OSCE Human Dimension commitments and the lack of any argument in supporting their policies compel those participating states to hide behind the gongos. Madam Director, the delegation of Armenia contributed to almost all working sessions on different topics, and we hope that our recommendations set solid framework for the OSCE Slovak Chairmanship in considering possible MC deliverables. Last but not least, the delegation of Armenia will continue to insist that human rights and fundamental freedoms are protected for all, including for the people living in conflict areas. I thank you.
Thank you, and now I give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by Canada.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. Let me start out by saying that the full text of our statement will be made available to the Secretariat. We would like to thank the officials and the staff of the OSCE's ODIHR for the organization of this meeting. Unfortunately, the event has shown that a number of delegations continue to have a politicized and anti-Russian mindset. As an example, just think of the statements by the USA, Canada, and EU member states that included ungrounded attempts to charge Russia with violation, in particular, of freedom of assembly. And yet the transgressions with which we are tasked are actually provided for in their national laws. The police of the USA have the right, under certain circumstances, to arrest people participating in assemblies. In Canada, there is a prohibition to organize such actions. In France, fines in terms of imprisonment can be imposed for organizing prohibited events. And in Great Britain, under the same circumstances, the forces of law and order are permitted to use physical force and special measures. Freedom of expression has yet again been put seriously to the test during our discussions here. The delegations of Ukraine and the USA tried on several occasions to interrupt representatives of NGOs they find inconvenient. In this respect, we are grateful to ODIHR for not allowing censorship to prevail at an OSCE forum. We also expect that the officials of ODIHR and the OSCE representative on freedom of the media will react to the fact that the Ukrainian authorities have charged civil society organizations from Crimea with for their participation in the review conference. Many participating states are still refusing to admit that there is a link between the crisis in the OSCE areas and the irresponsible and aggressive policy of the West aimed at their states. There is a counterproductivity of these attempts to achieve one's own geopolitical purposes. And today's authorities in Kiev are persecuting contrarians and taking illegitimate decisions about deploying punitive operations against the peaceful population in Donbass. Today in Ukraine, there is glorification of Nazism, former Nazi accomplices. There is forced Ukrainization of the Russian-speaking population. There is a limitation on freedom of expression and the media. Dissidents and journalists are persecuted. The authorities are flagrantly interfering in the affairs of churches with ongoing persecution of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its clergy and parishioners, and churches are being seized. People of goodwill simply cannot make their voices heard. And it's not the first time, not the first year, that the USA, the countries of the EU, and other states are taking advantage of the right of residents of Crimea to freedom of movement and expression to impose collective punishment on them. In the course of the meeting, on a number of occasions, we talked about the issue of the need to combat bad faith attempts to falsify and rewrite history, especially the history of the Second World War. In 2020, we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the victory in this war, and that must really be a stimulus to intensify our efforts in this regard. And in this respect, we are truly alarmed by the positions taken by the USA, Canada, the European Union, including the Baltic states and Ukraine, on acts of glorification of Nazism, marches of Waffen-SS veterans, glorification of collaborators and of organizations like OUN and UPA, manifestations of neo-Nazism and radical nationalism, publication of Nazi literature, and the war on monuments erected to those who freed Europe from fascism. We still have systemic problems like illegal migration and human trafficking, an increase in racism, intolerance and neo-Nazism, violation of children's rights, and freedom of religion, harassment of national minorities and journalists. Migration problems in Europe have not disappeared, and the freedom of peaceful assembly and safety of journalists are under threat. There is also a very topical subject of combating anti-Semitism, intolerance, and discrimination of Christians and Muslims. The decision of the Council of Foreign Affairs Ministers in Basel 2014 on a declaration to combat intolerance and discrimination of Christians and Muslims can be a roadmap for us in this regard. The OSCE can make a useful contribution to cooperation in the human dimension. The effectiveness of our organization can only be guaranteed through mutually respectful dialogue on an equal footing, aimed at collective adoption of decisions on the basis of consensus. Thank you for your attention.
To Canada, followed by Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much, moderator. We'd just like to say a number of things at this closing session. Firstly, on the importance of this meeting and the value as a forum. Most importantly to Canada is its value to civil society, and we believe that this was reaffirmed at this meeting. In our discussions with civil society organizations, both large and small, they talked about the ability to speak in the plenary on an equal footing with participating states, the ability to meet in the corridors with members of other geographic regions, which is difficult as the convening location, and to meet with participating states. We had a number of beneficial and useful meetings. Side events in particular held value, providing for more in-depth discussion and timely discussions. We regret that Turkey did not participate this year. We believe this was a missed opportunity to respond and engage with legitimate criticism, so we hope that they will be able to participate next year. As has been mentioned by many people today, there was more use of gongos this year, and unfortunately we saw this by more participating states than in previous years. And we saw it just in the last session we were all here for. The use of gongos undermines the purpose of this meeting, and it represents a weakness on the part of the participating states that use such organizations. In our view, it's counterproductive as it muddies legitimate criticism. It makes it difficult to discern between legitimate criticism and criticism that is state-supported by the proxy. And also that the states that use such proxies, in our view, would actually be better served by allowing real civil society to raise real criticism. I think the most useful demonstration of that was in the Roma and Sinti sessions, which very much showed an absence of gongos. There were a few, but an absence, and that was a very useful, constructive, and on-topic discussion. And so it's unfortunate that more can't be like that. We were also concerned about the misuse of points of order throughout the meeting. The situation did improve, and we thank ODIHR for responding to that. We would just like to reiterate from Canada's point of view, this was not targeted at any particular participating state. It was about the procedural matter, but in our view, it's very important to allow civil society organizations to speak. There's not a lot of time to speak at these meetings. These points of orders disrupt their flow, and so we're glad that those reduced. Also, we're very concerned about potential reprisals and repercussions for civil society participating in HDIM on them or their families, and we would reiterate our steadfast view that civil society participants must not and cannot be punished for their participation here. Finally, we did see a well-organized effort to mislead participating states and civil society about the situation in Crimea. Again, to reiterate our position, we will not and do not recognize the illegal annexation and attempted occupation. And we would also say this attempt did not work. I think we're quite confident in that. The majority of states share that view. We were pleased to participate in a side event on the need for international human rights monitoring in Crimea. And given that many invitations have been proffered during the meeting to visit Crimea, we very much hope that the SMM and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights can visit Crimea soon. We welcome the incoming chairmanship's human dimension priorities as laid out yesterday. And we would repeat for this session our encouragement to start as early as possible on agreeing on next year's HDIM agenda and specifically selected topics. That is one thing we heard from civil society, that more advance on the topics and the timing would be helpful. And finally, just let me thank ODIHR, the Slovak chairmanship, and Poland for their efforts in ensuring that we have respected our commitments by hosting and holding HDIM this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Kyrgyzstan, followed by Ukraine.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Madam Director, distinguished participants of this implementation meeting. I should like to thank the Polish authorities and the OSCE staff for organizing this meeting. It was an honor for me to speak on behalf of the delegation of the Kyrgyz Republic. This is an excellent platform which gives an opportunity for official delegations and also for active members of civil society to exchange ideas on thorny issues. The Kyrgyz Republic has consistently met its international commitments, supporting OSCE initiatives aimed at improving the human rights situation. As head of a department focusing on inter-ethnic relations, would like to underscore that the consolidation of social cohesion in the Kyrgyz Republic is underpinned by the principles of equality and non-discrimination. Pursuant to our constitution, no one should see their rights violated on the basis of their race, religion, ethnicity, culture, language, gender, or age. The government of the Kyrgyz Republic has noted with satisfaction the fruitful cooperation that's underway with all OSCE bodies. As a specific example, I can cite the cooperation of our office tasked with addressing the issue of national minorities and ODIHR. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank all of the civil society organizations from the Kyrgyz Republic and other countries for participating in this meeting. The Kyrgyz Republic stands ready, as always, to take part in dialogue with the OSCE and human rights organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Ukraine, followed by Tajikistan.
Thank you. Madam Director, we cannot assess the 2018 HDIM as a breakthrough in the review of the implementation of OSCE human dimension commitments. I would like to remind how painful it was the labor that gave birth to this year's HDIM. We invested a lot of energy and effort to agree on its agenda and modalities. We regret that these efforts resulted in a lot of actions that have no or too little traction with the realities on the ground, as my delegation pointed out at the opening. Distinguished colleagues, we view as unacceptable the Russian Federation political provocation as it manipulated the issue of civil society participation in the HDIM and organized side event to advance its attempts to legitimize Russia's illegal occupation and annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol in breach of the norms of international law, OSCE principles and commitments. We deeply regret that Russia used this HDIM to continue spreading its propaganda, trying to shift its responsibility on others for the growing repressions, serious human rights violations and discrimination in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, City Sevastopol, parts of Donbas temporarily occupied by Russia. I wouldn't spend my time of this statement to reply again to provocation, false and not objective and selective information just presented by the Russian Federation on Ukraine. I believe that it was well done during the 2 weeks of the meeting by the different representatives of our delegation as well by our partners. At the HDIM, Russia employed many of Gongos funded and hired in Russia and abroad, and brought representatives of the occupation authorities under the cover of so-called free journalists and civil society activists. They should be driven out instead of being given the floor by the moderators under the pretext of freedom of speech, as their participation depreciates of our procedures, norms and values. We wish to express a gratitude and to thank all delegations and civil society actors who demonstrate constant attention and genuine deep concern over the human rights situation in the Russia-occupied territories of Ukraine. Madam Director, we observe the erosion of HDIM as a platform for a genuine and open dialogue of the governments and civil society, as the event was hacked by Gongos and personalities without any human rights experience, who ignored OSCE principles and commitments, as well as OSCE rules and procedures. This erosion is caused by the deletion of the modalities of the meeting, their discrepancy with the provision of Helsinki Final Act. We regret that one OSCE participating state once again didn't attend the event, and the reasons of the absence of our partner were not addressed. We believe that the incoming Albanian chairmanship should initiate a discussion on bringing current HDIM format in line with OSCE founding principles and commitments. I thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to the last speaker on my list, I want to remind the participating states that if they want to exercise their right to reply, to indicate that to my colleagues here behind the head table. But now I have the last speaker on the speakers list. It's Tajikistan.
Thank you, Madam Director. Delegation of Tajikistan also joins other speakers in thanking and congratulating the ODIHR team and the Slovak chairmanship for organizing this meeting. I would like just to state that the delegation of Tajikistan strongly believes that participation of the civil society in the OSCE events is important in order to facilitate a genuine dialogue between all parties, especially the government and the civil society, and the active participation of the delegation of Tajikistan in HDIM's meeting this year during these 2 weeks is a clear example of the willingness of Tajikistan to be actively involved in discussions within the ODIHR agenda. At the same time, we are certain that registration and participation of the representatives of the groups condoning terrorism and the use of violence will not lead to genuine dialogue. This year also, regretfully, we all witnessed that dozens of representatives of the groups which committed serious crimes leading to killing of tens of thousands of people in the participating states were registered and participated in this event. I'm talking about the group which attempted in September 2015 a coup d'etat in a participating state, the group which activity were banned by the Supreme Court of the participating state, and the group which still continues condoning terrorism and violent extremism. Therefore, we think that it is necessary to continue our discussions on the provision of the Article 16, Chapter 4 of the Helsinki Document 1992, within the informal working group in Vienna. On the concerns and criticism expressed by my distinguished colleague, US representative, on the situation of human rights in Tajikistan, I would like to reiterate that Tajikistan strictly adheres to its international commitments and obligations, and stands ready to cooperate with all its international partners in order to improve and promote human rights in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was the last statement from participating states, but three countries have expressed interest to use the right of reply, and I first give the floor to France, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Director. I would like to exercise the right of reply of this statement in response to the statement made by the delegation of the Russian Federation. When it comes to the right of assembly, the recent events that took place in Moscow have shown that Russia really has no lessons to teach other countries. Let me just remind everyone that in France, the right of assembly is accompanied by an obligation in advance to declare any event to take place in public areas. That is for reasons of safety. And in fact, the Human Rights Committee has considered that the obligation to inform the police 6 hours before an event takes place in a public area, that this can in fact be consistent with Article 21 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And I would like to take advantage of this opportunity, Madam Director, to thank you for having organized this HDIM meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one to exercise the right to reply is the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Director. I'd like to exercise my right of reply in response to the statement by esteemed colleague from Tajikistan. As the United States has said repeatedly, we oppose attempts to restrict civil society participation in the HDIM and other OSCE events. Unilateral declarations that a group or individual falls afoul of the Helsinki 1992 rule is not sufficient. I appreciate the statement by my Tajik colleague regarding the importance of civil society participation in HDIM. It's a view that we share. In the same vein, in our view, taking reprisals against civil society activists for participating in HDIM when they go home is unacceptable. We're concerned about reports that authorities in Tajikistan retaliated against activists and or members of their families in recent days, and we respectively call on the Tajik government to cease these reprisals. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have on my list Finland on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you. I pass the floor over to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, in reply to the statement made by the Russian Federation, we would like to make 3 points. First one, the position regarding the crisis in and around Ukraine is well known. The European Union recalls its unwavering support to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and calls upon Russia to do likewise. We urge Russia to uphold these fundamental principles that it has itself invoked many times, and to contribute by acts and public pronouncements to stabilizing the situation and reversing moves that contravene these principles. We strongly condemn the clear violation of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity by acts of aggression by the Russian armed forces since February 2014, and illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol to the Russian Federation, which we will not recognize. The European Union will remain committed to fully implement its non-recognition policy,
right to reply, and time
including
is over.
through restrictive measures. Let me also remind the Russian delegation that in Moscow 1991, the participating states agreed that the commitments undertaken in the field of the human dimension...
Time is out, and now I have to give the floor to Kyrgyzstan to exercise
Can I just finish, please? Just a few sentences. As I also said before, I'm speaking on behalf of 28 member states. So we're saving a lot of time. Well, I'm saving a lot of precious time.
One sentence, please, and then it's
Are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states and do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the state concerned. The very purpose of HTIM is to discuss the implementation of our OSCE commitments, which include also the freedom of peaceful assembly. Finally, the European Union remains committed to combating all forms of intolerance and discrimination in an inclusive and comprehensive manner based on the universality of human rights, as reflected also in the OSCE commitments. Thank you.
The right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I wish to exercise the right to reply in response to the concluding remarks of the U.S. delegation representative. We regret to have heard unsubstantiated reference to the human rights violation in our country. I underline that the situation, the human rights and fundamental freedoms in Kyrgyzstan have been exemplary over the last 2 years and live up to our international commitments to the democratic principle. Such an assertion has been upheld by the numerous statements of the civil society representatives at this conference. I shall reiterate that we have no restrictions on civil society in general and restrictions on freedom of assembly, speech, and mass media in particular. The Kyrgyz authorities do not resort to the ill practice of using anti-extremism laws to go after dissenters, peaceful protesters, or political prisoners. In this connection, I wish to call on the U.S. delegation to provide the facts-checked information on the human rights situation in Kyrgyzstan. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I have Tajikistan on my list, exercising the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Director. I use my right of reply to my U.S. colleague. Again, I would like to reiterate that Tajikistan supports and always have been supporting the active participation of the civil society in HDM meetings. We again reiterate that the representatives of the groups and political parties which committed serious crimes in the country, the groups which tried to, which attempt to perform a coup d'etat in the country, and the activity of groups of the groups were banned by the Supreme Court of the country, is not acceptable for us. On the concerns that the representatives of the NGOs will return to Tajikistan and they will face some negative influence by the authorities, I can assure the colleagues that I can share all their contact, emails and everything in order to be in contact with them and to be sure that there is no any restriction of their of the activities in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I have Azerbaijan on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the statement and allegations made by the EU and the United States delegation, I would like to reiterate once again that the person mentioned in the statement was not accused because of any professional activity, but because of the committing a serious crime. And when it comes to other issues raised in the statements, I would like to reiterate once again that those issues have been clarified by my delegation in previous statements and during previous sessions. So I would encourage the delegations to refer to the statements and rights of replies made by my delegation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and this concludes this part of the session, the exercising of the right of reply. And now we move to the next item on the agenda, which is any other business. And there are two countries that have asked to take the floor under this item, United Kingdom and United States of America. I give the floor to United Kingdom. They have 4 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Director. And I read this statement on behalf of Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States. In November 2018, 16 OSCE participating states invoked the Moscow mechanism to look into credible allegations of serious human rights violations and abuses in Chechnya allegedly committed during January 2017 to November 2018 against LGBTI persons, human rights defenders, members of the independent media, lawyers, and others. In 2018, the report of the Moscow Mechanism mission found that harassment and persecution, arbitrary or unlawful arrests or detentions, torture, enforced disappearances, and extrajudicial executions had indeed occurred. The report also found a climate of impunity surrounding allegations of such violations and abuses in Chechnya. We called on the Russian Federation to make full use of the report and to implement all recommendations contained therein in order to address the issues raised in a constructive manner. 9 months on, there has been no constructive response from the Russian Federation authorities. Meanwhile, new credible information has emerged about additional allegations of serious human rights violations and abuses in Chechnya. In January 2019, the international community received information about a new wave of violations and abuse, including allegations of unlawful detentions and torture against persons based on their actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity, which reportedly took place in Argun and Grozny from December 2018 to January 2019. According to credible reports, the Chechen authorities also tried to prevent victims from fleeing the region or filing complaints, using methods such as destroying or confiscating their identification documents or threatening them or their relatives with criminal proceedings. Human Rights Watch corroborated the information through victim interviews in May 2019. To date, no official investigation, local or federal, has been opened. In July, new details emerged about extrajudicial executions of 27 men in Chechnya that reportedly took place in January 2017. The investigative newspaper Novaya Gazeta, the Human Rights Center Memorial, and the Russian Committee Against Torture released disturbing new accounts from eyewitnesses, confirming the detention of the 27 men by Chechen police in connection with the December 2016 terrorist attack in Grozny. They also confirmed allegations of the execution of the 27 by strangulation on the night of the 25th of January 2017. The new information also suggests that local and federal authorities have gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal what occurred and to prevent a proper investigation into these violations. Madam Moderator, the climate of impunity described in the Moscow Mechanism report clearly continues to prevail. The Russian authorities appear to be doing nothing to alter the report's conclusions that the government appears to support the perpetrators rather than the victims. We call on the Russian Federation to rigorously pursue the investigative leads provided by the new information that has been brought to light. In addition, we again urge the Russian Federation to act now on the recommendations of the Moscow Mechanism rapporteur to 1. Open an inquiry into the actions of the government of the Chechen Republic towards LGBTI people. 2. Ensure all Chechen authorities, including law enforcement and security agencies, fully comply with Russia's domestic legislation and international human rights obligations. And 3. To open a new pre-investigation or pre-check at federal level into the case of the 27 persons allegedly killed by Chechen security forces, or undertake a special investigation with the inclusion of international experts. We will continue to raise our concerns with regard to the numerous credible allegations of ongoing serious human rights violations and abuses in Chechnya until we receive a substantive response from the Federation and observe tangible progress in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second one on my list is the United States of America. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Director. For many years, this agenda item has been used to follow up on the use of the Moscow Mechanism. The United States would like to raise concerns about human rights in Turkmenistan and Belarus. We lack adequate information on many individuals who have been arrested by authorities and are held in state custody with no accounting for their fate or whereabouts. The United States repeatedly has raised concerns about prisoners who have not been allowed to communicate with the outside world for years, including our former permanent representative colleague at the OSCE, Batyar Berdiev. NGOs have documented numerous cases of individuals whose fate is still unknown. The families of these individuals have no reliable information on their whereabouts, their health, or even whether they are dead or alive. They have a need and deserve to know the fate, health, and whereabouts of their loved ones. Turkmenistan authorities should provide information on and unhindered access to all prisoners and ensure that families have information on the whereabouts and well-beings of their relatives, including their current place of detention and details of their custodial sentence. The United States welcomes reports that activist Gulgedi Aniyazov family has been able to visit him in his current detention situation in Garaboaz. We hope that these reports are true and the government of Turkmenistan will unconditionally release him from detention. Authorities should facilitate access to medical care and legal counsel of choice for detained persons, including detained foreign nationals, and provide access for relatives and international monitors, as well as consular access to detained foreign nationals. We would like to acknowledge the government of Turkmenistan's assistance in arranging a joint US-EU visit to the Tenjin prison in November 2018. We hope that this visit is not a unique occurrence and the government will grant further unrestricted access to other detention facilities in the near future. In 2011, the Moscow mechanism was invoked to examine concerns regarding the demonstration on December 19, 2010, and the following crackdown on protesters, opposition leaders, journalists, human rights activists, lawyers, and civil society organizations by the government of Belarus. Individuals detained following those events have been freed, and many of what the rapporteur, Professor Emmanuel Decau, described as, quote, gross and systemic human rights violations have reportedly stopped. However, the government of Belarus still has not conducted an independent and impartial investigation of those events, restored full civil rights to former prisoners, and identified and brought to justice those responsible for reported enforced disappearances dating back to 1999 and 2000. We call on the government of Belarus to fully implement the recommendations of the Moscow Mechanism Rapporteur. Thank you, Madam Director.
Thank you, and this concludes this item on the agenda. Any other business? And now we have come to the final item on the agenda, which are the closing remarks. There will be closing remarks from the OSCE Secretary General, from the chairmanship, and then I will conclude with my closing remarks. But first I give the floor to Ambassador Paul Beckers, Director of the Office of the OSCE Secretary General, on behalf of the OSCE Secretary General. The floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you, Director, dear Ingeborg, Ambassador Katarina, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This year's Human Dimension implementation meeting draws to a close. And above all, I think we all have to thank our colleagues from ODIHR for what they have done over the past 2 weeks. And maybe it's not according to protocol, but I brought you a little gift from Vienna, Ingeborg, to say thank you to you and your team. Because ODIHR's ability to organize this complex meeting on the tightest of deadlines frankly astounds me. Every year they seemingly put it off with ease, but in reality it is a logistical nightmare and a struggle unworthy of this organization, of our organization. And we all know what the underlying issues are, so I will not dwell on this. But I do want to express my hope that next year will be different. I keep my fingers crossed that there will be agreement on a practical mechanism to solve the dispute over civil society organization access to OSCE meetings. I would also like to show my appreciation to the chair of the informal working group, Ambassador Frattini, for his good offices and good work to try to make this happen. And dear Luca, you are from Vienna, though, so no Mozartkugel for you, but instead some stroopwafels. Ladies and gentlemen, despite these challenges, we've had 2 weeks of intense discussions covering the full gamut of human rights issues in this one single meeting. And I would like to make 3 observations. First, human rights are critically important to all of us present here, as individual human beings or as representatives from participating states. Participating states that have vowed to protect them, as members also of civil society that are standard bearers for human rights in difficult times. And it's good that we come together here every year, but we also need to work closely together throughout the year. Second point I would like to make, and it's been expressed by various delegations, threats to security are increasingly cross-dimensional, so we need cross-cutting and integrated approaches in which protecting the dignity of the individual is always a central element. Human rights protection is not just ODIHR or RFRM. Their mandates in the third dimension are prominent, but all OSCE structures, including the OSCPA, have a role to play. That's why all parts of the OSCE family attend this meeting. It helps us ensure that OSCE activities in all dimensions comply with our shared commitments to promote human rights and fundamental freedoms. My third point, HDM is going with the times. We heard more about digital technologies than in previous years. But we are only just beginning to understand the implications of rapid technological change. It's important we stay on the ball. And in this context, allow me to reiterate the Secretary General's invitation to an OSCE Security Days roundtable that will be devoted to a human rights-centered approach to technology and security, which will happen in Vienna on November the 8th. Dear colleagues, in closing, I want to thank all of you, all participants, in particular from civil society organizations, for joining this meeting, for drawing our attention to the many challenges in our region, and also for pointing out some of the solutions that might be effective in addressing them. And I would not close without thanking Poland for generously hosting us. Dziękuję za polską gościnność w tym roku, jak co roku. Next year, we will be commemorating the Charter of Paris for a New Europe. Following on the collapse of communism, it was the second CSCE summit after Helsinki. Let me give you a quote from 30 years ago. Ours is a time for fulfilling the hopes and expectations our peoples have cherished for decades. Steadfast commitment to democracy based on human rights and fundamental freedoms. Prosperity through economic liberty and social justice. And equal security for all our countries. 3 decades later, these hopes and expectations are unfulfilled, but remain very valid. So thank you all for your commitment to protecting and advancing this agenda. And I wish you all safe travels back. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And now I give the floor to Ambassador Katarina Czakova, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Slovak Republic to the OSCE. Madam, the floor is yours.
I thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear participants. We gladly use this opportunity to commend the 2019 HDIM, which has proven to be a vital human dimension forum, a place for critical but constructive dialogue. HDIM serves as a mirror to participating states vis-à-vis the implementation of their commitments. It's clear that much work still needs to be done on both commitments and new challenges. The highest respect and full enjoyment of human rights of all should remain the ultimate goal. There is no peace and security without human rights. The human rights component should be deeply embedded in all conflict resolution efforts. The Human Dimension Implementation Meeting is the most important event in the OSCE Human Dimension. As Europe's largest annual human rights conference, this year with more than 1,500 participants, it distinguishes itself by its open character and broad participation where both government and civil society representatives sit at the same table. This is what makes HDIM unique and in line with what we all committed ourselves to 20 years ago in Istanbul, that participating states are responsible to their citizens and accountable to each other for implementation of their human dimension commitments. Dialogue as the basic prerequisite for trust and cooperation stands at the forefront of our chairmanship approach. Such a dialogue must be based on talking to each other, broadening and deepening of our shared understanding, not just formal exchange of positions. This year's HDIM has a special significance also to my country. Not only it is held in the year of the OSCE chairmanship, it also marks the upcoming 30th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, great political and social upheaval, wave of freedom that began in Poland, host country of our annual meetings, surged over the wall in Berlin, and ultimately liberated millions of people across Europe. we have witnessed the truly incredible transformation of Europe in the past decades. Without the Helsinki process, these achievements would simply not have been possible. For Slovaks and Czechs, Helsinki process had particular significance. It inspired the human rights movement that drew attention to the abuse of human and civil rights by the communist regime. Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear participants, a record number of civil society organizations have been present and engaged here from across the vast OSCE region. Many are human rights defenders and have a key role to play in strengthening respect for human rights in our region. Standing up for human rights in the face of danger and repression requires tremendous courage, especially when some governments whose responsibility is to protect and implement human rights impose laws and policies that do the opposite. We commend the work of our region's human rights defenders and listen to their recommendations. We would here also like to stress in no uncertain terms that any intimidation of reprisal against civil society representatives or their families for speaking at our HDM is simply and completely not acceptable. Slovakia, both within the OSCE chairmanship term and beyond, is committed to work in close consultations with all participating states in a spirit of cooperation and as a honest broker. We support ODIHR's irreplaceable role in the OSCE architecture and are grateful for strong interaction and cooperation during our chairmanship. To conclude, I want to once again thank ODIHR for working hard to make HDM happen, to Poland for hosting us here, and to participating states and civil society representatives for their engagement in the meeting, for exchanging information and best practices in reviewing our shared OSCE commitments. With this, I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now the morning has peacefully passed and I can say good afternoon to all of you. And I would also like to express my thanks to Ambassador Paul Beckers, the Director of the Office of the OSCE Secretary General, and to Ambassador Katarina Czakova, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Slovak Republic to the OSCE, for their kind remarks. My thanks also to all of you here for attending this last session of the 23rd Human Dimension Implementation meeting. I'm pleased and indeed proud to be able to tell you that with more than 1,500 participants, this year's meeting has seen the highest attendance ever. It has been a very full but also extremely productive 2 weeks. We began with a series of speeches from our high-level speakers that included a keynote by Lech Wałęsa. He made a powerful appeal to look for new solutions to the new challenges the world is facing. And who could be more convincing than one of the heroes of the peaceful revolution of 1989, who was so successful in finding ways of solving the challenges of his generation. And while we could have spent at least twice as long to do justice to the important and complex issues we have been talking about, the three focus topics of this year's meeting, safety of journalists, hate crime, and Roma and Sinti, have nonetheless been discussed at length. I would like to thank Arlem Desir and his colleagues at the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media for his engagement in the sessions dedicated to the safety of journalists and media freedom. As those of you who were present will have seen, our discussions here in the plenary on hate crime, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination were heated and sometimes overheated. This is a core topic for ODIHR and one which, I can unfortunately say with certainty, is a challenge for all 57 countries across the OSCE. In some countries, the prejudice and discrimination that so easily tip into violence tend to be based on political affiliation. In others, it is old-fashioned racism, in which members of some ethnic and religious minorities often have fewer opportunities and a greater likelihood of becoming victims of intolerance simply because who they are. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of these and other discussions in the plenary, I'm sorry to say that not all of our conversations have been held with the respect due to all participants. We noted an increase in the number of times speakers in the plenary were stopped by points of order from delegations who did not have procedural points to make, suggesting that their primary purpose was to interrupt others. This is at odds with the decision of the Permanent Council on the objectives of the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, which stipulate that sessions of the H-Team are devoted to forward-looking discussions with a view to refining and further developing OSCE commitments. At the same time, we noted that some participants continually strayed from the topic of the session, despite reminders from the ODIHR moderator and the fact that the issue to be discussed was always clearly marked on the agenda. I would therefore ask all participants to take some time for reflection, not only on their return home now, but next year when they prepare for the 24th Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, the list of issues discussed during the meeting went far beyond the three focus topics. They range from the fundamental freedoms of association and of conscience and belief at the beginning of last week, through the need to strengthen democratic institutions, including the independence of the judiciary, the electoral process, and equality between men and women in public life, to the protection of refugees, the fight against torture and human trafficking, and the rights of national minorities. The need to create space for civil society to operate and the protection of human rights defenders was a thread running throughout our discussions. In my opening remarks last week, I spoke of the need to develop clear and concise recommendations for both participating states and for ODIHR and other OSCE bodies, and I'm delighted to say that many excellent proposals have been made. The final list of well over 500 recommendations will of course be made public as soon as they have been fully compiled. Ladies and gentlemen, the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting is not only big. By bringing together representatives of government, civil society, international organizations, and academia to review the progress made by national governments in fulfilling their commitments in the field of human rights, it is unique. This uniqueness was epitomized by the 90 side events organized at this year's meeting by or with the participation of civil society organizations from throughout the region, across the political spectrum, and ranging in format from legal discussions to film screenings. I would like to emphasize that it is our common duty to make sure this diverse group of participants is able to attend H-Team without being subjected to harassment, threats, intimidation, or other forms of reprisal for their contribution. I therefore call on all participating states to ensure that neither participants nor their families face any negative repercussions on account of their participation in H-Team. Each individual here has the same right to speak and to be heard without fear. This is the heart and spirit of the Helsinki document and also of our annual meeting. Indeed, Miroslav Lajčák, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovakia and the OSCE's chairperson in office, put it well when he said last week that H-Team allows the conversation between states and civil society needed in order to, and I quote, translate the words of human rights into facts on the ground, unquote. And I must say that the many positive discussions and future-oriented recommendations made over the last 2 weeks have been very heartening. I have attended most of the working sessions here, and I was impressed by the level of speakers that I listened to and of the variety of interventions that I heard. I have myself also had numerous bilateral discussions with delegations and organizations from across the OSCE area, and despite the often challenging issues under discussion, each one of those conversations was held in spirit of dialogue and compromise. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to my final point. Frank discussions and the willingness to find consensus through dialogue is the only way to achieve solutions to the challenges that we face. To seek compromise is not a weakness. It is a strength that indicates a will to find a better future for our societies based on the enjoyment of human rights by all. Thanks to you all once more for attending the 2019 HTEAM, but allow me also to thank the interpreters, thank also, and last but not least, to all my staff that have made this meeting happening. And I look forward to welcoming you all next year. And by these words, I declare the HTEAM 2019 is closed.
And what a timing. And what a timing.